Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 2nd. You are at the Kubernetes SIG Testing bi-weekly meeting. I am today's host, Chair of SIG Testing, Aaron Kirkenberger, also known as Aaron SIG Beard or SpiffXP at all the places. This meeting follows the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which means we're going to be our very best selves to each other. It's also being recorded so that it can be posted publicly to YouTube shortly. On today's meeting agenda, I've got a quick heads up, and then we've got some suggestions from Chow and Arnaud to talk about things. So with that, I'll just sort of dive straight into the fact that code freeze is coming for Kubernetes. Typically, code freeze doesn't impact any of the code changes that land in the Kubernetes test info repo or any of our other sub-projects. But it's a thing we need to be aware of. I'm basically, I guess, asking folks here if you know of any changes that you definitely want to have landed for the Kubernetes 123 release. If there's anything we should be paying specific attention to in the next 2 weeks. Stuff that typically comes up around this time are any major test changes or anything that attempts to change a bunch of container images. We've made great progress in migrating to community hosted images. The other thing we try to keep an eye on that's not necessarily code changes for Kubernetes are things like workflow changes for the project. So if there are any like major potentially disruptive workflow changes or crowd changes, we may want to consider whether we should try landing those now or pressing pause on them or adopting a little bit more of a careful migration or rollout strategy. See everybody. Nobody's got anything they particularly want to land, is what I'll take the silence as.
How long does code freeze last for again?
That's a really great question. I'm gonna look that up real quick. I think it's a Kubernetes dev/release. Typically, I think code freeze these days lasts until the release actually happens. So code freeze will happen Tuesday, November 16th. Then test freeze. So these are test only changes. If you want to like land your feature, then land your tests, which don't do that. That's not good. But for things like conformance tests or things that have been hanging out waiting for approval for a while, test freeze is November 23rd. And then I think things just stay frozen until the release happens on Tuesday, December 7th. So that's what, 1, 2, 3 weeks of freeze. And then my impression is it's kind of a lull until sometime next year. I think I had seen some traffic on Kubernetes issues about maybe using this time for any large scale breaking changes or like messy refactoring that we might want to land. The one that's top of mind for me is moving the Kubernetes default branch from master to main, which requires renaming like a bunch of shell scripts, a bunch of jobs, test grid dashboards, all that fun stuff. I think the plan is to start on that after the release goes out the door. I think the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that I'm gonna have to like walk and talk here to find. Somebody, well, Antonio, why don't you go say your piece while I look for my thing.
Yeah, and now Claudio is in the meeting. He has some PRs to implement pre-pulling of images on the E2E, and I mean I think that's interesting, but I don't
Oh, yeah.
know if all of you are aware, because I review with some of the PRs, and I don't know if he will need more help to land this before code freeze.
That's a good point. Basically, what's the idea with the pre-pulling images? I already saw that for node tests, the images are being pre-pulled, and basically I'm proposing something similar for regular E2E tests. This is because we have been seeing some flakes in the Windows CI because some tests were expected the pods to start up in 1 minute, but if those tests somehow end up being the first ones to run, it might take longer than 1 minute to pull and unpack the Windows images. They tend to be a bit bigger than Linux images. So that pull request, I'm gonna link it in chat. I think, yeah, Antonio already linked it. Thank you. That basically introduces an optional argument. By default, it's false. If it's set to true, it's basically going to spawn a daemon set for most of the E2E test images on, so that basically every node will have those images cached locally, and then deletes them and then starts the test themselves. So for most Linux scenarios, maybe this won't be a typical scenario, but for Windows, it could be useful.
It seems reasonable to give it some soak time now before code freeze. I'll see if I can take a look at this later today.
Mhm.
Oops. Sorry, still trying to find my thing. I'll put this in meeting notes too.
And I do have another pull request, which it might be useful for us from what I observed. It's regarding if a test fails, we don't really see anything that happened in the pod, if there are any issues there, especially if there are networking issues. A lot of services, like diagnosed services that are being started up, every request is being logged, which is extremely useful, but we don't see that in case of failed tests. So if we could actually see that information, we might get some more in-depth view as to what happened for that failure. Did that request even reach the pod or not? Did it fail with some inter-pod communication? We don't know, because we don't see any of the pod logs in that scenario. So I've also sent a pull request for that as well. In that one, by default, we get the logs from the top 5 pods in that test. In most cases, it's more than enough. And in other scenarios in which the test spawns too many pods, more than 5, labels could be added to the most important pods. That should be logged, basically. This basically came as a necessity to say so. We have been seeing flakes, and it is a bit hard to root cause it as to what exactly happened and why did it fail.
Yeah. No, I think this totally makes sense. I feel like this is another one I would want to turn on and just sort of see what it does. The only thing the only impact I can think of is like an increase in the size of the artifacts that we store. Or maybe there's going to be some flakiness in actually retrieving the logs for these pods. It could be the pods end up going away before we're able to retrieve the logs from them. But I don't know. I'm willing to sort of for some live test data or some live test traffic.
When it comes to the size of the logs, we only log the last, how many were them? 40 lines or something like that from the pod. So even in extreme scenarios, it will only be 40 lines deep. And the test that would generate a lot of logs would be the probe ones, in which basically we'll send periodically probes to some container which will then be logged. But in a lot of them, it might not even be logged at all. And this will only be executed in the cases which the tests failed. So in typical test runs, maybe there are a handful of failures.
Okay. I'll put this on my queue.
Thank you.
So the one I wanted some folks' eyes on was an update to the approved plugin. We had this person come by SIG testing a while back and sort of walk us through a demo of adding a granular approval flag to the approved plugin so that people could /approve specific paths or specific directories. This is all in service of trying to, let's see, empower more people, I think, to approve files. It's targeted at like getting rid of the, targeting the root owners or root approvers issue for Kubernetes. The fact that like there are very few people in root approvers, and we kind of don't want to add more people to root approvers. But we do want to, for those people who are like overprivileged, we want them to be able to say, I am approving just this specific part of it. And we can also allow people to approve just like specific paths inside of it. I'm fumbling on the use cases here, but the idea is this was discussed and brought to SIG testing a while ago, and then I think was iterated on, and initially it had been done as a separate approved plugin. The functionality has all since been gated behind a flag. I think my ask is I want maybe like Cole and or Alvaro to take a look at this just to confirm first if we deploy this as is without enabling the flag that there's no change in functionality. And then for us to consider the implications of whether we want to enable the flag or whether we want to suggest that we not mess with the flag on the run up to code freeze and stuff. Like I think if we wanted this deployed kind of now-ish or this week-ish would be the time I would want to see it, so that we would have enough time to revert it as we start to see sort of an oncoming flood of code reviews and PR pushes and people trying to get their stuff landed before code freeze. Like I approve of the idea in principle, but I need people who have a little better granular, God, the granular is in the title, but like more granular knowledge of the approved plugin to just make sure the performance implications or any corner cases seem like they've been addressed.
I have some thoughts on this. First of all, this is the first I'm seeing of this. It's a little unfortunate because I kind of had some opinions about the approved plugin earlier, namely that we should like completely rewrite it rather than continuing to add more functionality to it. It is very confusing, and like huge amounts of the code are vestigial and could be refactored into things that make far more sense. And I'm a little alarmed that this PR is 6,000 lines of changes.
So it actually is 6,000 lines of changes, mostly because it is a rewrite. It initially actually was a separate plugin, and we asked to make the transition smoother for repos by just making it a flag to run the new code paths.
But was asked to duplicate the existing plugin, which is the very first commit, and then change the copy of the duplicate, like change the copy. However, like I'm just looking at this, and the second commit that supposedly does this still changes the original approve, and is still almost 6,000 lines of code change. So either we should really duplicate and have a diff to the original that is somehow digestible, or as Cole suggests, start from scratch and rewrite it. Because as this right now, this is extremely hard to review, and I would be super concerned that we miss something. Because the problem is, if we miss something in this area, this has gigantic implications. This is really something we cannot mess up. So that's why I'm so concerned.
Okay.
For what it's worth, a lot of this is tests.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I want some pushback. Like I have this impulse of this has been sitting out since March, and I think Alvaro took a look at it back in March, but I don't know how much we've actually engaged with this since then. And yes, because of the large implications, I'm wary of having this land so close to code freeze. So I think maybe Alvaro or Cole, if you guys could sort of, what I'm trying to figure out is there anything that is usable here? You know, if they could break the commits out in a way that makes this easier to digest or easier to review, is there value in doing that? Because if I were this contributor, I would find it frustrating that after 9+ months, the feedback, or 9-ish months, the feedback from the people they've been trying to like get attention from is actually we got to redo the whole thing entirely. Would be a little frustrating. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can work with this. You can drop some comments on this, I'd appreciate it.
I agree that it's a very frustrating situation. I wonder if that's, you know, I'm not sure how we should handle that, I guess. Like Alvaro's looked at this a little more than I have, so maybe you know, like how much the other two commits are. Like I'm just looking at the two commits that are supposed to be the you know, the changes, not the copy, and it still looks very massive. Do you know how much of that is actually changes, and how much of it is stuff that should have been put in that first commit?
No, not really. I just basically looked right now at the following commits. No.
Yeah, I think like I'd have to go back and dig through the meeting notes, the recording to know for sure. Like I do recall this person showing up and actually like walking us through a demo of the proposed functionality. I think maybe the part of the process here that was lost is how we typically go through a design doc or a CAP or something to really walk through the implementation and the implications of this. And I feel like if I didn't have the memory of them showing up at the meeting, this PR looks an awful lot like dropping a multi-thousand line PR as the first step of engagement, which typically doesn't go very well. So it could be what's missing here is like a document that sort of lays out the design decisions and choices that were made. And it could be that breaking up the commits to make them more digestible in concert with the doc where we're talking about the decisions and the trade-off with the change is such a fundamental part of this project's workflow. Anyway, yeah, I'd appreciate some feedback from you, Alvaro, and maybe I can chime in as well.
Yeah, I have a look and try to leave feedback in the comment. Yes.
Okay. see.
I also just posted a
Since-
link to the issue where I kind of went over or outlined a lot of the problems with the approved plugin that kind of motivated my opinion for thinking we should just do a rewrite.
Thanks. Yes, I know making regex stuff better than the group plugin is a thing. The only other thing I can think of about the big change prior to code freeze since Arnaud is here, the quick Kate's infra hat on the scalability jobs. We've migrated over the 5,000 node performance test over Kate's infra, but we haven't migrated over the 5,000 node correctness job yet. I was wondering if there was anything specifically that was holding us up there.
Not really. I think I want to leave that decision to SIG Scalability because I talked to one of the leads and what he told me is they need some kind of bandwidth to do the migration and babysit the job in case there are some failure. So I did everything to prepare the migration. Now it's just an approval from them.
Okay, that's everything that I could think of off the top of my head for code freeze. And thank you, Claudio, for and Antonio for bringing some other things to the table. With that, I'm going to hand over to Chow to talk about GitHub dependable.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron. So as I have asked Slack a couple days ago, we found out that we can turn on GitHub dependable alert without modifying the code base. So I turned it on and I was not prepared that we have 17 alerts. And I'm looking at the page right now. I can copy paste the link in the meeting notes. So, do you guys mind if I share, or I think Aaron, you should have permission to open the link.
Yeah, let me allow you to share.
All right. So basically we have 4 critical severity level and 5 on high severity. I'm not quite sure whether we should care. Or how much we should care about this.
I can, by the way, not open this link, and at least for me, okay, there's the share. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sharing right now.
This is only visible to like people who have admin access to the repo, which for what it's worth, I think I'm of the stance that the tech leads for the SIG should have admin access to this repo.
I also agree.
+1.
So here is the critical severity and high severity one. I guess we can ignore the moderate severity until we have resolved the top ones. The question is more like, should we worry about these? Some of them does go into our binaries.
I think this is very hard to tell if I'm looking at it like that. For example, the JWT one, I don't think we do anything that would exercise this, but I might be wrong.
The JWT one, I think it's using Jira. I forgot. I think it's a plugin, Jira plugin.
Ah, okay.
Is it used by the GitHub app functionality as well? or like for authenticating as a GitHub app?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
I think not, but I'm not 100% sure either.
Yeah, as far as I can tell from Go mod trace, this is used only by Jira plugin. Some of them do have fixed, but this one doesn't. This one doesn't. So GitHub will tell you which version you could bump to mitigate this, but this package apparently doesn't have a good version to use. So some of them, I guess, we can just easily fix, like use the patch version update.
Reading the text of the last one, it made it look like if we upgraded to a later version, it would actually fix the issue. Maybe I
You mean
missed
this
that.
one?
No, the JWT one.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't have a.
It doesn't show a
have a
patch
fix.
version there, but at the bottom it says users are advised to migrate to a later 3.2.1.
Yeah, but even that doesn't. I don't think it's a fix.
Okay. I don't know. My stance is if there's any possible chance this could be used by Prow, I wouldn't want our attackers escalating privileges on our CI system.
Yeah, I'm on the same page.
We probably do need to go through them and see how possible or not it is to get patched versions. Sometimes it's difficult if it's a transient dependency and the dependency hasn't updated or something like that, and is incompatible.
Yes,
but
yeah, that's the problem.
But if that is not the case, we should definitely update our versions.
Yeah, I'm also hesitating to raise the issues because I don't think we want to expose these to folks to tell them, hey, Prow has this vulnerability, please use it. So I feel like it's more like a secret channel communication, or unless you guys object this idea, then I can raise 17 tickets. We can address them one by one.
I think we just need some general, we need to update our dependencies. The Python stuff should probably be pretty unblocked. The Go stuff might still be pending on finishing the Bazel transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I assume the leads should take care of these, right? We don't want people to see this.
To be honest, I'm not super
recording.
Well, not only are we recording this meeting, but
yeah, and
Okay.
also I'm not super concerned
Do you
about
want me
this because Power has a couple of shortcomings. Like you can easily bring a Power instance down by repeatedly calling specific endpoints that are expensive to calculate, and I think it's not super likely that this leads to a possibility of getting credentials or actually getting things to do something different rather than maybe just bringing it down.
It's also worth noting that this stuff is public data anyhow, and with Go and Python, it's trivial to check what dependency versions we have and find this yourself without the actual dependabot alerts.
That's true.
Like these are not privately disclosed vulnerabilities, actually. These are coming from like public Go databases and stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, also this is recorded anyway.
Yeah, and the ones that are critical severity, I don't know if any of those affect Prow at all.
I agree. PyYAML should not. This is probably used in tests. That's my guess. But anyways, that's just curious how we want to go.
No, it's a valid question. Like I want for us to facilitate collaborative discussion on researching. Like we have the option through the UI to dismiss these, But I'd like to have sort of documented decision-making to assist us in that. Either we've decided, yes, we want to upgrade the dependency, or we've confirmed that, you know, gomod trace or gomod y or whatever explains that like this doesn't affect us in a critical area. I think there's a part of me that's like, I still want that discussion to be at least a little bit embargoable. Something like using a Google Doc and restricting it to restricting view access of the doc to like leads for now, and we can add in collaborators who are interested in helping out. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions here.
I think most repos just use this as a hint that it's time to update your dependencies, and nothing heavier than that.
Okay, like I'm also super cool with opening up issues that we should bump these dependencies. Not necessarily explaining why per se.
I mean, just as a general thing, like we can just bump pretty much all of ours. I don't think we even need to target specific ones. This is mostly, I think, systemic of the fact that we tend not to update any of them.
Sure. I'm trying to avoid signing us up for the churn of updating many, many more dependencies than just these.
I mean, these are just the known bugs and vulnerabilities.
How would you like to
setting ourselves up for pain later, leaving everything outdated?
Sure, I understand that. We're accounting for that now, but I'm not sure, you know, is this more important than other stuff we have going on? So I feel like the critical severity stuff, well, I mean, all the stuff that has known vulnerabilities, probably important. I feel like just taking a pass at seeing which of these are trivial to bump without, you know, too much headache, and then seeing how that reduces the size of this list would be a good first step. And then we can sort of discuss, for those that remain and are trickier, you know, do we want to move forward on those, dismiss them, whatever. And I think that Chow, you've got stuff ongoing to like make bumping these a little bit easier via make instead of via Bazel. So the future where we bump at least our Go dependencies is coming, and we don't necessarily have to solve for that right now.
Right, yeah, I think I agree with what Ben just mentioned. With the deprecation of Bazel, the bumping of Go package versions are gonna be easier. So maybe we want to finish that first.
Okay.
The Python stuff won't change much either way though, right? Or do we also care about that?
I think we should go ahead and bump that. It's not going to change that much.
Yeah, the Python stuff seems like we should tackle now, especially since those are all the critical ones.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest problem with those is I'm pretty sure right now the way those work in CI is they're like pre-installed into the CI image, and then we just run and test against that non-hermetically. So I don't know if we can have confidence in the bump PR without someone confirming that they like check this locally.
We can create a canary job, right, with a new image and try it out.
Yeah, I think it's just more like I think we can probably just go forward with it, but we need to be aware that like it's possible that after we merge that, we might have to do some reverts once we bump the image forward. We might find out that like it doesn't actually work.
Yeah, and if all I'm saying is we can just copy the job and have a canary too to test things out if we're worried about breaking things.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention, Chow.
Yeah, cool. I think that's pretty much what I want to discuss. I guess we can. So who is interested in doing the Python upgrade? I will keep doing the Bazel deprecation until we can do the Go package update.
I don't know what I'm doing with the Python upgrade, but I'm happy to take a stab at it. Probably not today, but I can start looking at it this week.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. That moves us on to Arnaud to talk about Proud migration.
I feel like I need to let you talk about this because we had the conversation about pro migration 3 weeks ago, I think a month ago.
Problem is I keep like losing context and stuff.
Okay.
So
just want to refresh everyone. So I was talking about pro migration with Eddie, and basically we now have a pro instance running against the Braille cluster, different of the current one, and Eddie was asking what's the next step for the migration. So I kind of have the same question because I feel like we don't have a clear plan for the migration.
We're talking about migrating the Kate's Prow instance to the working group infra instance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
To a multi-tenancy cluster.
yeah.
I would imagine that the next steps would be to migrate, sets of jobs or individual jobs at a time. Is that kind of the approach?
So the thinking here is we've already migrated a bunch of community jobs over to a community build cluster. Let's just pretend for a second I could wave a magic wand and prow.kates.io suddenly doesn't run in the Kate's Prow project and instead runs in a multi-tenant app cluster that's managed by Kate's Infra. It's all it's going to attempt to schedule jobs to a Google-owned build cluster. And it's going to attempt to, some of those jobs that it's running are jobs that have nothing to do with the Kubernetes project. So if I look at it just from a jobs perspective, like we got to decide whether we should continue to kick off non-Kubernetes projects from prow.kates.io. I know there's a Google Cloud Platform multi-cluster ingress project, and I think maybe some of the Bazel things still run off of prow.kates.io. So just like finish migrating that stuff over to the Google's open source Prow instance. But for me, the bigger things are like the Google Cloud Storage bucket known as Kubernetes Jenkins, into which we dump all of our logs and stuff. And any associated, here, let me link this in chat. Like basically this is the last time I thought about it deeply. And I had concerns that we needed to make sure that if we were to stand up, like we have a Prow service cluster running over in Kate's. It's called katesinforprow.kates.io. And like, what would we have to do to flip domain names or whatever, such that that became prow.kates.io? So infrastructure-wise, I feel like we have to decide whether we would want that Prow instance still capable of scheduling to the google.com owned build cluster, or whether we would say, nope, it can't schedule to that cluster. Everything has to run in the community owned build cluster. And that leads us to the decision tree on which jobs should be migrated over or should not be. Then there's the Google Cloud Storage resources like Kate's Test Grid and Kubernetes Jenkins that currently live in google.com. Would we take some downtime to move those buckets over? Would we try to allow Prow to use those buckets from the community? Would we try and get Prow to use a different set of buckets over in community? There's that. And then the thing I don't even have listed here, I'm just realizing out loud, is like all of the workflow around continuously pumping prow.kates.io and stuff. I don't know. Like it all relies on the use of a Kates Prow project to host all the images, which is also google.com owned. It's unclear to me whether we'd need to add privileges for the community-owned Prow instance to write to that. And sorry, at this point, I feel just like I'm rambling, but I agree with Arnaud that like a migration plan needs to be developed, and I keep losing context and not having enough time to actually like get the context page back in and focus on it and come to it in sort of a rigorous step-by-step thing. I keep like trying to drop the things that I'm aware of based on where we are today, but I would love some help in actually putting a plan together.
So there are a few things that jumped out when we talked about this before. The budget is going to be the big one, especially once we start scheduling and putting logs on community-owned stuff, because I'm pretty sure our runway will just explode. We won't be able to cover it for the year, right?
Basically, I kind of, that's maybe almost an orthogonal thing to me at this point. I feel like we already lost our runway with the artifact hosting costs. But yeah, let's say ballpark it doubles our CI costs. If that's assuming moving over prow.kates.io also means moving over all of the other jobs that it currently runs, right? For reference, I think it's ballpark like 300 and something jobs run over in the community cluster, and there are 1,700 and something that still run in the google.com cluster. But traffic-wise, those 300 are like way more.
So these 1,700 remaining jobs, though, I doubt that many of them are for just Google purposes, right? Like most of the, like very few of those are going to be things that are, shouldn't be running in that cluster, right?
Yeah, a lot of it is like Kubernetes SIGs repos, like cluster API, all the cluster API repos, all the cloud provider repos. Like there's a lot of valid stuff that hasn't been migrated. I sort of, in terms of, if we go back to your suggestion, Cole, of like think about just the jobs that we should migrate, thinking that like running jobs is the majority of the CI spend, not necessarily the control plane or the service cluster. Then yeah, we've migrated over the jobs that are principally aimed at release blocking and merge blocking jobs for Kubernetes. We haven't really opened the floodgates to jobs for all of the other 100 and something repos that make up the Kubernetes project. Part of that's just from like a billing perspective. It's really difficult to segregate out billing on a per job basis. So we wouldn't be able to wave a magic wand and say like, well, SIG cluster lifecycle, you get a budget of this many thousands of dollars, and it's up to you to make sure that you don't run too many jobs to blow your budget.
Yeah, using build clusters is probably the way I'd recommend doing that. If you want SIGs to be able to manage their budget individually, they can each have their clusters for that.
Yeah, I agree.
I suspect for a lot of the SIGs though, the cost is actually in the Boscos pools primarily.
And then not really,
Also,
because
the overhead of a build cluster isn't free.
Not really, because some SIG have a lot of requests in terms of resources. I would say, for example, SIG release. Most of the job of SIG release not run in Boscos pools, but directly on the build cluster. They consume a lot.
Yeah, I think kind jobs eat up a whole node for the whole time they're running. Anyway, I feel like we're getting off tangent here. The motivation was to see if there's a way we can migrate just the service cluster, because the idea here is great. We're spending the community's money on jobs that run in the community-owned build cluster, and that's cool. But I feel like people are less incentivized to contribute to and help support Prow because they can't touch the Prow control plane. They can't see the same logs that all the on-call people can see. This is all kind of in service of allowing more community members to be able to join an on-call rotation that's basically best effort, and to be able to help out. And so the fact that Prow runs in a Google.com only project is the blocker to that.
Right, but isn't that also because it controls a bunch of other Google.com resources?
It used to. I'm
I
not
mean,
so sure that it does anymore.
Like old Boscos pulls in also the build clusters. I feel like if you haven't moved the build clusters, you can't move the service cluster. Just because of credentials build clusters.
Well, so I guess that's an open question. Do we think it would be a blocker to allow a service cluster that is outside of Google.com to schedule to a build cluster that is inside Google.com?
What credentials are in the build cluster that we're concerned about? Are these just the few credentials for accessing like the Google, one or two Google Cloud Platform repos?
I mean, it's more like these are Google.com accounts, and if we could just grant external access to these things, we wouldn't even need to move the project. We could just grant people access to the project. Like there's no upside to moving if we can grant external access. The only upside is moving the billing, which apparently is a problem right now. So maybe we don't want to do that.
So for example, if we migrate a job that updates your internal calendar for on-call rotation, is it okay to move that job outside google.com?
Actually, that's not a Proud thing at all. That's a Google internal thing, updating another Google internal thing that ends up in a Google Cloud storage bucket somewhere.
Okay.
That's a Borg job, actually.
That's, yeah. I love it.
Now, because I think we don't have a full list of things of credentials we need to migrate. So they may have some corner case, and we maybe need to review all the temporal SIG testing job to ensure we can easily migrate them without security concern.
Like I would do the security stuff I'm thinking of is I have a service cluster, Proud service cluster outside of Google.com that has the kube config to be able to schedule to a build cluster, which y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but last time I went through this, it required setting up basically an admin level user. So a GKE cluster outside of Google.com more or less has full control of a GKE cluster inside of Google.com. So it could schedule whatever it wanted inside of that GKE cluster. Kind of depends on like what workload identity bindings would be present inside of the Google.com cluster, how far something would be able to get from there as far as what it could or could not access.
Are you saying that we have that working today?
I'm just waving my magic wand and asking if
I was saying I thought that was actually like a technical blocker. The like being able to grant permission.
I don't think there's a technical block on that. I question whether we should be doing that.
Yeah, I like if I were to pretend I was somebody working at Google security, my eyes would be, I would have the look of disapproval on my face. I'd have the legate googly eyes. So
I don't know. I think we should be moving the build clusters for sure. I think we should be getting everything moved over. I don't.
So the other way of thinking about this is would there be a dance we could do where like let's say we leave all the jobs there and they still schedule to a Google.com owned Kubernetes cluster or a Google.com owned cluster that runs like largely Kubernetes jobs, but some non-Kubernetes jobs. And like, what if we were to swap domain names? So now we have prow.kates.io. That's Kubernetes thing, and it's running mostly the it's running the Kubernetes release blocking jobs, and we encourage people to migrate more of their jobs to run on it. And then what's left is like Google Kates.prow.io. So it's still around and it's still accessible and it's still triggering jobs. But we're going to deprecate it. So that way we're still kind of like running the same set of jobs in the same places.
Having both temporarily sounds good to me. I would say that we probably shouldn't switch the name though until we are able to deprecate, because I think that that'll just cause more conflicts and issues. Right, if we can keep the name consistent, at least until we're ready to make that the other source of truth, that might be easier.
Okay. Well, I keep feeling like when I walk away from these discussions, it's like, well, I guess I should go write a doc. But I feel like Arnaud is holding me accountable to the fact that I keep not doing that. So I can take another crack at this. But I think I'm going to definitely get Cole and Chow to take a look at it this time and see if, I don't know, maybe we could tee this up as one of those things that happens after the release goes out the door. You know, could we do some slightly disruptive stuff at the end of Q4 to make this happen? The main thing we haven't discussed here is like workflow related stuff when it comes to the continuous deployment of Prow and its images and all that stuff. I feel like that needs a little bit of a think as well.
Yeah, I think we have pretty clear paths forward on all of that. I agree that we need to flesh it out, but yeah, I think that all of that, there's no technical barriers there that I'm aware of.
Okay. Yeah, and Chow, I know you migrated Kubeflow off, so I'm sure you'll be able to point us in the right direction. I think that's everything we had on the agenda, and we got 2 minutes left. Sweet. Oh, I see Arnaud's back. Arnaud, did you have any, like, how does all this sound to you?
Oh, great. So I don't have a specific question in mind right now. So.
Okay. All right. Well, unless anybody's got anything for our last minute, I'm going to call it. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a happy Tuesday, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.